Because we have such a large number of people, we're obviously not going to do introductions. But feel free to put your name and organization in the chat, just so people know who's here and who you're affiliated with. Great to have everyone here. I know we still have people joining, but I'm gonna jump in just so we have time to work through our program today. Let me just say again, I'm John Colborn. I'm Executive Director of Apprenticeships for America. And I'm joined in our webinar today by my colleague, Harry Leach, who's going to be helping with some of the presentation here. What we're going to do is, for those of you who were part of the field consultations we did around the Biden executive order, these webinars are going to feel kind of familiar to you. And so what we're going to be doing over the course of the next few weeks is going out and seeking your input, ideas, reactions to different components of the executive order and what we see as sort of follow-on actions and recommendations that we're going to be putting to the Trump administration. So I want to use this opportunity to give you a sense of sort of what we're going to be up to and how we're going to be doing that work. Denise, do you want to just share the slide deck up here? That'd be great. Great. Again, because we have a fairly large crowd, we're now over 100 people. If you can just advance to the next slide, Denise, that'd be great. Just a little bit about protocol. I think everyone has entered on mute, which is great. Stay on mute just to keep the airwaves a little bit clear. What we're going to do is we'll start with about 20 minutes of sort of a little context and background just to get everyone sort of centered on what it is we're talking about. And then we'll spend the balance of our time in open conversation around the executive order. Because we have a lot of people, we're going to just ask you to use the raise hand feature to make a point or to ask if you want to be recognized for speaking. And then also, please do feel free to use the chat to record comments or ideas around the conversation that you're hearing or just anything else. We definitely use the chat comments as we are synthesizing these meeting transcripts for our work going forward. We are going to be recording this session so that people who are not able to participate are able to hear the session. But we will also have a sort of after the session, a little bit of, call it 10, 15, 20 minutes, where we're just going to be open to hearing reactions, sort of processing what you've heard. Anybody that wants to stay on and share something off the record, you can feel free to do that during that period. I think with that, I'm going to turn this over to Harry, who's going to walk us through. So let me just give you a little overview. Harry's going to walk us through the executive orders themselves, just to do some level set. He's going to talk about what at least we at AFA see as some of the opportunity that's here. And then I'll come back and we'll be having a conversation for the balance of the time. So I think with that, Harry, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thanks, John, and welcome everyone. As John says, I'm just going to give a bit of context up front. So I'm going to cover three things. Firstly, what the executive orders say, then talk a bit about this 1 million active apprenticeship goal, try and set that in some context and numbers, and then talk a bit about our process, how we're going to structure these feedback sessions. So starting with the executive orders, Denise, skip ahead to slide 4. So 2 weeks ago, we got 7 executive orders on education and workforce. There's 2 of them that are meaningful to apprenticeships. This is a first, preparing Americans for high-paying, skilled trade jobs in the future. What it covers, so overall it expresses the administration support for registered apprenticeships, which is good. It puts to bed any uncertainty about whether there'll be a return to IRAPs, a policy in the previous Trump administration. On the specifics, so it sets a goal of surpassing 1 million new active apprenticeships. The wording is a bit confusing here, but from the fact sheet, we understand this is reaching and surpassing 1 million active apprentices. So increasing from the current 680,000 or so. There isn't a specific timeline set out here. We'll come back to that later. And then this is the most notable bit for us. So the executive order commissions a report within 120 days to produce a plan to get to that number. Plan looking at three things: what the avenues are to expand into new industries. It doesn't specify exactly what those industries are. The fact sheet talks a lot about advanced manufacturing. Our interpretation is, we're talking about a broad range of non-construction occupations. Secondly, measures to scale the model across the country, so that encompasses funding, policy changes, regulation. And then thirdly, enhancing the link between education and apprenticeships, with a nod specifically to Perkins and federal student aid. So we think this is quite funding focused. Looking at the next slide, there's some broader non-apprenticeship provisions here, not to go into too much detail on them. Overall, it establishes a policy to optimize and target federal spending on workforce development to align with reindustrialization needs. And it sets out a process to do this, reviewing all spending and programs to reform ineffective spending. There's an interesting nod here to identify alternatives to four-year college degrees. And finally, it also directs departments to improve transparency on performance outcomes and indicators, with a focus on economic indicators, so wages, employment. On the second executive order that's relevant for us on the next slide. So this is a one on artificial intelligence education. On apprenticeship specifically, so the main thing for us is a focus on increasing participation in AI-related apprenticeships, with three specifics. Department of Labour to establish a goal for growing apprenticeships in those occupations, using intermediary contacts and discretionary funding, and creating industry-developed standards registered on a nationwide basis. So there's some interesting takeaways we'll get into here. Firstly, there's a big question about what exactly we mean by AI-related occupations. We'll get into the detail of this in later sessions. Our initial thinking is there's two angles here. There's working directly on AI, and then there's a larger group of occupations working with AI. Other takeaways, great, there's a nod to intermediaries and their role in expansions. And then the language on the industry developed standards point is really interesting. This is something we've always thought there's a key role for national standards and expansion. Most other countries have them. It's a really complex question, one we want to spend some time unpacking as we get into it. Then on the next slide, on the broader provisions on AI, I'm not going to go through the details here. There's other groups and people who have much more insight than us on it. There's one question on the fourth bullet here that may have some translation to apprenticeships, which is there's a big push on kind of using AI in education to improve education. So there might be some thinking for us to do on the opportunities for apprenticeship practice. So that's an overview of what the executive orders say on apprenticeship. We'll come back to all the detail in later sessions. Just going on to the next slide, I want to spend some time looking at what this 1 million apprenticeship target looks like. So our takeaways on this: firstly, it's great. It's really positive that the administration has set us a target. It gives us a focus point. On the number itself, we'll go through some numbers, but we think this is achievable. It will need some investment and policy change. Final point, major point for us is we shouldn't see 1 million as any kind of cap or limit, but rather as a stepping stone to a bigger system. So AFA's overall ambition here is to reach 4 million active apprentices. So yeah, just a few bits of analysis to support those points. What this slide sets out is projections of growth under different scenarios. So that first blue line, which I think we should think about as a baseline, is taking the current growth rate and projecting that forward. So over the last decade, apprenticeships have grown at around 7% a year, mainly through expansion to new industries. So if that rate of growth continues as is, we reach 1 million by 2033. I should have said as well, this is just looking at civilian apprenticeships, so it's without excluding the 120,000 military apprentices. That second green line is applying the English growth rate from over the last 30 years, which is 11%. That's actually similar to if you took out 2020 from what's happened in the US, there was a fall then because of the pandemic. Then apprenticeships in the US have grown at around 11% as well. So here you get to 1 million active apprentices by 2030. And then the third, kind of more ambitious, the purple line is taking the French growth rates more recently, specifically from 2018. So this is much higher, 17%. Interestingly, this is a point where in France they put in major employer incentives, so 6 to 8,000 euros for the employer per apprentice, and did some quite big policy and system reforms. So what I'd take away here is, if we're talking about rapid expansion, if this administration is trying to hit 1 million within the current presidential term, it will take that step change and the type of scenarios we've seen with significant incentives and policy changes. Looking at the next slide. So this is another way of breaking down this 1 million goal. This is highly speculative. There's lots of ways to kind of cut this up, but we just wanted to give an example of what this could look like. So taking this from left to right, first block is our current active civilian apprentices, around 540,000. The next block is looking at unregistered apprentices. So from some analysis that Bob Lerman's done, we think there's probably around as many unregistered apprentices in the US as there are registered. There's currently, few incentives to register. There are some at the state level, there aren't really any federally. If through this process we see some meaningful financial and other incentives to register, you'd see some conversion from that group. So if you took just 20% of currently unregistered apprentices becoming registered, that would mean another 100,000 registered. The third block is looking at youth, which I think everyone knows an area with significant potential. We've done some broader analysis that we'll share at some point on this, but if you look at take the destinations of one high school cohort, so that's 3.7 million roughly graduating high school each year. We think currently there's about 0.5% going into apprenticeships within the first few years of graduating high school. So that's around 20,000. If you could increase that to just 2% of the cohort, that's another 75,000 active apprentices. And then finally, that fourth block, which is the remainder, comes from expansion into new industries, which I'll get into on the next slide. So looking at the kind of new industries question, I think one first kind of contextual point to make is new industries is probably a bit of a misnomer at this point. We do have programs in most occupations now. It's a question of scale in those industries rather than kind of apprenticeships existing. What this graph shows is if you transpose the occupational distribution of apprenticeships in England onto the US labour force, what it would look like. So the biggest sectors in English apprenticeships are health and public services, business administration, engineering and manufacturing, and then construction. So that's 1.2 million. If you transpose that into the US labour force, we'd have 1.2 million apprentices in health and public services alone. I wouldn't take these numbers necessarily as kind of where we should be by industry, by occupation, but it's a good indication showing how other countries have done it, showing just how apprenticeable those occupations are, that the model can scale outside of the trades. So yeah, I think I mentioned we've got some more comprehensive analysis on expansion, different cuts of what apprentices by occupation could look like that we're going to put out soon in a full report that that will hopefully support the work on these executive orders. So we'll share more details soon. Final thing to talk about up front is our process for dividing up sessions, gathering feedback, inputting into the executive orders. So on, if you could go to the next slide, Denise, on the similar, as John said up front, similar to what we did with the proposed rulemaking last year, we're going to pull together a document based on feedback from the field and with recommendations on all these different bits that the executive orders encompass. So over the course of the next 5 weeks, we're going to run sessions like this one to gather feedback on the areas we think there's a major interest, or there's some major points for us to get across. We're going to start with funding next week. That's going to cover both kind of funding mechanisms. Do we need tweaks to existing funding mechanisms? And do we need some new approaches, new ways to incentivize employers, new ways to cover the costs of apprenticeships? Then we're going to cover national standards, what this means, what this looks like in practice, what the kind of emerging interesting ideas are, and more pertinently, what the barriers are and the difficult questions we need to get right. Then youth, what the measures we need to think about to increase participation in youth apprenticeships. Then AI, what occupations we're talking about, what the kind of promising programs, initial practices are, what expansion looks like. And then finally, the role of states, what these changes mean for the state agencies, how they impact on them, what support they need. Format-wise, we'll run these sessions similar to how we're doing today. We'll give a bit of context up front and then have these as kind of open, structured discussions. If anyone wants to get involved and help with the context up front, please get in touch with us. Really open to partnering with other people. It'd be really good as well to hear from you if we're missing any major areas, or if there's any other formats that we should be using to kind of gather thoughts and comments. I think that was everything I was going to say up front. So I will pass back to you, John, to open this up.
Great. Thanks, Harry. And thanks, everyone. I know we're already collecting a couple of questions in the chat, so feel free to put questions or topics you'd like to discuss over the next 40 minutes or so. But let's just start with some very basic clarifying questions. I see Todd has raised his hand. So Todd, you can lead us off.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thanks again, John and Harry as well. The goal of 1 million apprentices is a lofty goal. There's no question about it. But I think when we're looking at cohort models, you're not looking at, right? Let's just, right now, you have 600,000 apprentices. They're done in 4 years. So you have people in, people out. That's just nothing more than a static number snapshot of the day. So by default, 1 million will be achievable within 4 years by itself, because 600,000 now, and again, apprenticeships are anywhere from 1 to 4 years in duration. That's 1.2 million people right off the bat without doing a thing. So that being said, again, a voluntary program, a fantastic program. We all operate them. The incentive, we want 1 million apprentices. Well, where's the employer stating they actually want that? That's number one. Number two, has that actually been part of the data to say, well, you have 600,000 and we want 1 million more above the 600,000. That 600,000, again, is not a static number. So you won't have 1.6 million. You will have 1.6 million in 4 years. There's no question about that. Absolutely, there's no question about that. But that number needs to be reflected that they're very movable targets. So by either doing a victory lap in a couple of years, by doing nothing would be appropriate. But at the same time, it's like, well, yeah, we all want to grow. So there's to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. Harry, maybe you want to, there's always a confusion. I won't say confusion. I'm always confused in apprenticeship numbers between the number of active apprentices and the number of new apprentices. And as Bob Lehrman will always school me, he'll say there's stocks and there's flows. And so, Harry, do you want to just walk us through that as it relates to this goal?
Yeah, sure. So currently we've got the flow is around, I think it's around 250,000 new apprentices each year. that's been ticking up every year for the last decade. And then we've got 680,000, including military active apprentices, which is a stock. You're right, Todd, that it will go up from where it is now based on the flow increasing. I would say if the flow stuck at what it is now, around 250,000, we wouldn't automatically hit a million in a few years. It's a bit slower than that. The relationship between the stock and flow is it's not as strong. I think the ratio is like 1 to 2.2 or something like that. So the average length of time that people are doing apprentices is kind of just over 2 years. So we've got more people coming out of the system. So we do need to increase the flow to hit this target. But you're right. There's a question of ambition here and how achievable it is, which is why we think overall we need to be aiming for a higher number. And if you look at other countries, a stock of around 4 million active apprentices would be a reasonable place for the US to be.
Excellent. Clear as mud, I'm sure. Let me also just say that this goal has there's about at least every time we have a conversation with someone, there's a slightly different interpretation of the goal. So we've given you ours, which informed by some of these conversations. But we're actually in the process of sitting down with folks at the Department of Labor to try and get a little more clarification about how they think about this goal. What I think we do take from it, and it's hard not to take from it, is that there's an ambition for growth and an ambition for growth that goes beyond the current growth rate that we're seeing in apprenticeship. So we, from the perspective of an organization that wants to expand apprenticeship significantly, we take this as very positive. But yeah, exactly how those numbers get played out is still a point of some conversation, I think. Is there any other sort of clarifying questions about the executive order? What did they mean? What does this idea mean for apprenticeship? Then if hearing none at this stage, oh wait, sorry, Roger just put in a question on the chat. Yeah, the reference to intermediaries in the artificial intelligence order is really interesting. And I think we are still sorting out exactly where those intermediaries might fit and what activities they might be taking on. We also know, and we just need to own some of the challenges we're working with here, that some of the intermediaries doing work under previous administrations have had their contracts eliminated or cut. And so, I think there's some question about how all that plays out and what that looks like going forward. But Roger, I think, and we're going to come back to this question of connection to the higher education funding streams, like the VA and VA education, GI Bill, and other funding streams. So more to come on that. But I think the opening in the executive order is pretty clear that they are looking for some level of leverage from the higher education funding streams to support this goal. Nick, you have your hand up, so I'm going to bring you in for a question or comment.
Thanks. I was more specifically asking about the AI executive order and what does the administration mean, if anyone knows about what AI means to the administration.
Harry, do you want to take a first stab at that? I think similar to the 1 million number, the answer is no, not really. So I don't think there's much detail in this in the executive order or the fact sheet. Our thinking is there's going to be a narrow group of occupations of people directly building AI models, working on the technology, and there's a question about getting apprentices into those. Like that's definitely in scope. There's then a slightly messier question about everyone who's working with AI in any occupation in a significant way, which we think should be in scope. Like if you take the wording of AI related occupation, that feels like it's in scope. But I think we'd separate it into those two groups, but that's definitely something for us to dig into.
And I'll just add, I think something for us to opine on, that I think the administration is looking for some feedback and ideas about how to focus around that. All right, from the Sunflower State, we have Shonda Anderson. Shonda.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have the answer, but in your conversations, can you please ask how this is going to impact specifically WIOA and the local workforce boards, understanding that they're going to cut or intentionally or try to cut around 40% of DOL, but expand funding to registered apprenticeship. That's going to have an impact on several of those various WIOA programs. So obviously there's duplicity in a lot of things, but then there's other aspects that are very important in their own individual nature.
I
Just
so
keep
first
that
off-
at top of mind, please.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, Roger Torkington, thanks for your comment in the chat on this and sort of where all this fits. We've done, I'm just going to say back of the envelope sort of calculations that would suggest that if there was in fact a consolidation of WIOA funding and along with the cut, and if 10% of that actually is dedicated for apprenticeship, we would see a slight increase from the current level of federal support for apprenticeship under that scenario. I don't think but you want to jump in here, Shonda?
Yeah, so I don't think it's just about the funding that I'd like to know about. It's also going to be around performance measures.
Yeah, great.
So
Excellent.
if registered apprenticeship is going to be a priority for DOL, I'm assuming that it will also pass over to the WIOA. Is there going to start becoming some performance indicators that they have to report out? Because that obviously is, based on the formula of funding that they receive. So,
yeah, no, that's excellent. As well
Thank
as
you.
we have some frictions around WIOA performance measures and apprenticeship as well.
And grants too, right? Because if you take on federal funding grants, you do have to report out through the WIOA system. So, yeah.
Very good points, and thanks for raising. There's clearly a lot more work to be done on this question of the WIOA integration and in fact the consolidation. Our intelligence is that there was not a lot of consultation with Congress before this executive order came out, judging from some of the conversations we've had with Hill staff. And so I think Congress is also trying to sort out sort of what all this could mean. And again, that's an opening for AFA and the field to be able to offer some perspectives on how we might
But John,
proceed.
I don't know if you've watched, there's been several bills that have been introduced since January connected to apprenticeship. A lot of them have been bipartisan.
Yep.
So, I mean, clearly it's on the front of several folks' minds. So just interesting context.
More to come on that. Let me open this up for any other sort of reactions or thoughts as you're looking at and along with, Shonda's, you can take Shonda's lead here. What are questions that you have or that you feel like we should be trying to track down as we go forward on this?
I think when you see the world of work-based learning expanding into K-12 and also post-secondary, the utilization of pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship is going to be the norm, as opposed to just something in the to be utilized from ad hoc.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for queuing that up. And actually, I want to shout out to Andy Smith, who raises a question around the how do we integrate some of the Department of Education funding streams with this goal. There's clearly, some interest in trying to do that. And we're going to actually, in our funding conversation coming up, Harry, is that 3 weeks?
Next week.
Oh, next week. That's our next week. In our funding conversation, we really want to try and dig into what are the opportunities in student financial aid, in Pell, in the federal work study, in other in some of the Octave and adult education funding pots that we might want to try and lean on. Fran, you got your hand up.
Hi, yeah, thank you. What's your thought on the integration with state systems and how that is the apprenticeships are collected in California through DAS, right?
Yep.
So which is not a DOL data number unless they're dual enrolled, they have both enrollments. So what do you see, or what are you hearing about integrations with state systems and those numbers?
Harry, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just on the numbers themselves, we're actually doing a separate project at the moment, looking at the data landscape in apprenticeships that we're going to get a report out towards the summer. I think we all know right now it's not working that well, right? We've got misalignment between the state and federal data, and as Shonda raised earlier, like different reporting systems for apprenticeships, and we are on that aligned. So what I say to your point is, I think we should see this as an opportunity to fix that. If we can't count apprenticeships accurately across these different systems, we're not really going to have a particularly good idea of where we are, or more importantly, what's working. So, that should be a major part of our feedback and recommendations, that we sort out that alignment and come up with a simpler, more streamlined way to report data on apprenticeships.
And I'll just say, I think the first sort of policy indication we had from this administration around apprenticeship was in the state apprenticeship expansion grant process that just closed a couple weeks back. And I think what we saw in that, and saw in the administration's edits to the Biden solicitation that went out, really suggests a very strong interest in giving states significant latitude to pursue growth strategies around apprenticeship. How that actually plays out, I think is still a question, and we certainly want to provide some recommendations and ideas around that. But our read from the state apprenticeship expansion grant process is that states are really central to the way the administration wants to move forward with this goal. So we'll see how that plays out in the continuing conversations around the executive order, but that's our read right now. And we have a whole session that's devoted to the question of the state's role in this coming up towards the end of our consultation process. I want to turn to Erwin, who's got his hand up. Erwin?
Yeah, sorry. I'm on my iPad. John, can you imagine another category of apprenticeships that are like innovation or benchmarking apprenticeships, where organizations could train people to go do things that would help the organizations do things that they don't have the time or the energy to do right now? For example, a simple case would be like learning Six Sigma and applying that inside an organization. Other cases would be, in a more friendly political environment, going to other countries that have mastered some kind of manufacturing or construction. China has all these methodologies that we don't seem to be using in the US that would be great for somebody to bring in and learn. So that's a category, it seems to me, that would be very beneficial and attract a lot of new people to apprenticeships.
The beautiful thing about apprenticeship is such a flexible model, and certainly can be used in many, many different ways. And I think what you're pointing to is what I think is one of the developments we're seeing, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, which is the use of apprenticeship as an upgrade path for incumbent workers. I think there's plenty of opportunity there. Always the question of how you define your occupation and define competencies and what that looks like. I see no reason why that couldn't possibly be one of the ways we use apprenticeship.
Okay,
I'm gonna,
thank you.
I'm going to switch over to Andy Smith, who's got another comment here. Andy.
Thanks, John, and thanks everybody. Really pleased you've got these sessions going. Part of what I was going to say also references the comment that Zach's just popped into the chat as well. Certainly, as I saw things progressing and growing in the UK, we saw universities start to really get involved and very interested in the whole process of apprenticeship because they realized there was money in this. And that's not being negative to the universities. Great programs in many instances, but actually not always great programs. So we've always got to remember that as well. And I see degree apprenticeship being definitely something on the roadmap as we come along. I do think the connection to economic development, and there's a couple of people have linked to that as well, is super important. And I think for me, the question I have is really, how much are we trying to, through Department of Education, are we trying to make sure that apprenticeship has a relevance and a reference point? And actually that being if I say a political objective, rather than actually a practical objective of getting numbers, because you could argue, you could go the other way around this. If you just purely drive the volume of apprenticeships and successful professionals, which those of us who've had the opportunity to spend time around apprentices will definitely tell you that they are professional. Well, actually, for me, what is the parity of esteem that we want? Is it that these people have the educational recognition across the landscape, or actually is it that these people are successful and that then those who are not apprentices start to ask the question, how did you get to be so successful? Well, I did it because I went through this route. It's an alternative. It is not a replacement for the other educational pathways. And I just wonder whether there's a little bit of politics here rather than real pragmatic volume driving. I hope that makes sense.
Well, I can't imagine there would be politics in a presidential executive order. My take on this is I think there's reasons for both optimism and engagement with the higher education sector as a partner, and to be able to sort of drive growth sort of within more traditional educational offerings, as well as separate from. And so our take is to really look at sort of both and approaches. And for those who are reading Kathleen Delaski's book, Who Needs College Anymore? One thing she says is, and she advises that everyone who's working on alternative credentials should just start calling them college. That you have a college through apprenticeship, you have college through micro-credentials, you have lots of different college pathways. And so just because in the popular view, that's what people do after high school. So my guess is that both our vernacular and our strategies are going to evolve on this over time. But I do think the question of interface with traditional higher education funding streams is going to be a critical question for some of the growth work that we would want to promote under this executive order. Is that responsive, Andy?
Yeah, I don't propose that there's a single option or a single answer here. Yeah. There's a whole load of work has to be done, and I was just going to pop a note in the chat, but means I'll come back in. I'll just say it. Education is an ecosystem, and we have to recognize that it's not all about one process or one pathway over another. And that includes to the point being raised earlier on about things like Six Sigma or going and learning from placements. And I'm going to call that, I know the reference was specifically manufacturing or technology in China. That's a placement. And there is nothing to stop you in engineering that as part of a program of development for an apprentice. What you have to do is you have to build the program accordingly. to enable that placement to happen and to have some very clear objectives for it. But for me, it's about rather than, and if I come at it from a very low level perspective, from a school, a college, a university, private training provider, or an employer, they all have a part to play in the education of individuals because they all have roles at different times in the life cycle of individuals. So the sooner we can get to a position where we recognize each other and stop trying to beat up on each other in terms of supremacy, the sooner we can get to an ecosystem that starts to take the best of each parts of the offers and turns a product out that is for the best for the individuals. And I think that's a little bit aspirational, and perhaps in some respects you could argue it's naive because we know people won't always do what you want them to do. But if the sooner we can move towards that way of thinking about the system, and whether you call everything a college or whatever you call it, actually it's all part of the educational process. That's what we should be aiming at. And then the apprenticeship model, which is only a process, fits very easily then to take advantage of who's offering the actual education input.
I think you just summarized a lot better than I did Kathy's argument, Kathy Delaski's argument on this.
Can I just add one point?
Go ahead.
And Andy, I think you make excellent points. Can I just add one practical point on why the apprenticeship degree route is going to be important in the short term for expansion? And Josh has made a similar point in the sidebar. So in the US, we've got a higher proportion of jobs that still require degrees than anywhere else. I think it's just under 50% still, and that change is going to be slow. There's going to be a core of that. They're always going to require some college education. There'll be a core that it doesn't, but they have the label because it's an identifier. If we're thinking in the short term about expansion, an apprenticeship degree is a solution to expansion in a set of occupations that are still going to want that badge. So yeah, I think it's really important for us for practical reasons in the kind of short to medium term.
And if I can just add another practical reason is we have a relatively funded ecosystem, relatively better funded ecosystem in higher education than we've got in workforce development or other fields. So it's just there is some resources there to lean on. I want to bring in Hunter. Hunter, you've had your hand up for a little bit.
Yes, well, my name is Bill Mitchell. I'm on Hunter's team.
There you go. Okay, sure.
I'm the executive director of Access Point, which is an IT apprenticeship program, and I think it leans towards what Andy was saying, in the essence that our related instruction is all front loaded through higher education, and then 6 months after they graduate high school, we do training from our staff. Related instruction happens from our IT professionals. I guess my question is twofold. One, we serve women in underserved markets, so WEO is a big element of which leads into another question that was brought up earlier, how that WEO is going to be impacted, but more importantly, how do you see a hybrid of using both higher education? I'm blessed that the Chancellor of St. Louis Community College is forward thinking, and the Minneapolis, Minnesota's community college is forward thinking in this essence that they want apprenticeship programs. But I know my time in California and Nevada, sometimes those local institutions did not have the support of apprenticeships. Do you think this executive order is going to help us maybe instill that? I know instill a hybrid component. I'm not saying that anybody should use the community colleges, but Edward Jones, MasterCard, my big Express Scripts or Evernorth, they're my providers of my jobs for $50,000 to $70,000 a year for a high school graduate. And so I'm trying to maybe assess, we were looking at moving the high school ages to the pre-apprenticeship program because most of our retention failure happens in high school because kids don't really know what they want to do. And then I think that leads me into the funding thing. So the big question is, does it really matter if we separate? Does it look like forward thinking what this legislation is going to look like of splitting both pre-apprenticeship and the apprenticeship component? We will still keep it through the higher ed institution, but do you win any points at the federal level because of politics? If we both use the higher institution, we actually write the curriculum. I'm blessed CGI now acquired our company that our IT professionals write the curriculum for the community college. So we're much driven by the businesses, the community college. So Darty Business Solutions, who was acquired, wrote the curriculum. So we're blessed. Most apprenticeship programs don't have the power behind them like I had. So how do you see that happening with the pre-apprenticeships and the apprenticeships? How does the funding look in both those verticals, I think?
Yeah,
Really
great
helpful.
question. And I think to be explored in a little bit more detail in our higher education and funding stream focused session.
Okay.
But I will say, I mean, there's been very, very clear messaging from day one in this administration that there's a desire to pivot from, and then this was quite clear in some of the rhetoric around these executive orders, pivot from a college for all model to a model that embraces many pathways to careers and opportunity. And so I think that will be both a desire to look at alternatives, but also a desire to push those alternative pathways into higher education institutions. I see it as going both ways, but we will see as time plays out here.
I kind of envisioned when I started this, you know, we're an ambassador in the ambassador program with the Department of Labor. But from my experience, when I started this, I just really envisioned it being more of a hybrid, because I kind of envision higher ed not wanting to lose that talent pipeline, and our employers want them to have a 4-year degree if they want to break the glass ceiling in pay. So thank you for your response.
Thank you for your question. Todd, we'll take another question from you, and then we'll begin to wrap up here.
Thank you for letting me comment for a second time on that. On the previous speaker, pre-apprenticeship has a correlation directly in the registered apprenticeship, just like AP has it to college classes. And secondly, with regard to, is it political? With regard to higher education, it's societal. There's no question about it. It's not an alternative. It's how we're actually using the words, because the words post-secondary for all should be exactly what we're speaking, due to the fact that
for all.
in
Very
K
good,
through
Todd.
12, if an
Yeah.
individual doesn't go to higher education, they are looked upon in society as lesser than and not equal to. Therefore, it lends to be a punitive action of either an insult or condescending because you didn't go to higher education. So this paper ceiling that has cost so much to get a degree with absolutely no job skills is part of the reason why this next generation is calling itself the tool belt generation, is more likely to getting to apprenticeships than actually to higher education. So we are all proponents of education, but we should be starting to call it post-secondary for all and not just looking down as opposed to higher.
I love that, Todd. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. Just as we wrap up here, I want to say thanks to everyone for your comments in the chat and directly. We're going to be using the next couple of weeks as an opportunity to drill down deeper on some of the questions that have been raised here. So next week, the focus will be on the money, and we'll have a little bit of our own analysis about what we see in the skinny budget, as well as what we see as opportunities to connect better with higher education and other funding streams. So we welcome your participation in that session. If you haven't signed up already, you can go to the apprenticeshipsforamerica.org website, go to events, and all of the webinars related to the executive order will be displayed for you there. Harry, any other last comments before we wrap up here?
Just a chance to get some feedback for us. Just I'd be really grateful for anyone's thoughts if we should do another session or another topic. Are we hitting the right notes? Is there another area that we should spend some more time exploring other than what we've set out?
Any thoughts, Nick?
Do we have an idea of when we're going to get more clarity? I think this is great for us to have.
Nick, we're having trouble hearing you. I think it's a volume thing.
Is this better?
There, much better. Yep.
Sorry, headset down. Do we have an idea when we're going to get more clarity on what these mean? Because I think this is great to have a call and for us to spitball and brainstorm. But I think, once we get more clarity, we can actually start to do some action.
Yeah, very good point. So the timeline for this, Harry, 120 days from the date of the executive order, which would take us to, let's see, that's August, I think. That's when, in theory, there should be a report. I will tell you, these reports are notorious for missing their deadlines. So don't know for sure that we'll actually, I wouldn't set my watch on it. So part of our goal in these webinars is to be able to influence that report and be able to get our own ideas into the actions that the administration should be taking to advance this order. But I would imagine summer will be a time when we'll get a little bit more clarity around this. And although you wouldn't necessarily know it, there is another branch of government, the Congress, that, as Shonda said, has some pretty significant interests in apprenticeship, and we're expecting there to be interest from the House and Senate around both the funding issues around apprenticeship as well as policy-related opportunities for them to weigh in on some policy. So one of the audiences for our final report, as you can imagine, is not only the administration, but members of Congress and the congressional staff. So just know that that's part of the work that we're doing here. I think with that, I'm going to bring us to, was there anything else in terms of suggestions for topics that we should be hitting? Yeah, Shonda?
I'm just gonna,
Noah.
I was just gonna say that again, in your conversations that you have with DOL and some folks on the Hill, in terms of messaging, what is their plan in messaging this out to traditional occupations
Excellent.
and union JATCs? And I say that from lessons learned and ensuring that they're still engaged in the conversation somehow. I don't want them to feel like they're getting lost or forgotten about, that there's still an importance.
I really
On that
appreciate
as well.
that. Yeah, and thank you for that. I know we're doing some meeting with our brothers and sisters in labor in the next couple of weeks on this, so we'll get a sense on that. Noelle, last comment.
Yes, thank you. In terms of future topics, I'd love to have a conversation about pre-apprenticeship.
Yeah, okay.
I'd love to have a conversation about how we continue to push for equity and reducing occupational segregation in the face of some attitudes that are not supportive of that. And then I was just also wondering what conversations you all might be having with apprentices or people who are interested in becoming apprentices.
So we are not taking that on directly, but I appreciate the impulse that we should be seeking out those voices. So that may be something we do with our members. I think that's a great idea, Harry. Maybe it's something we follow up on. And thank you for the call out. And actually, I think this came up in the chat as well around how we are baking inclusion so that all Americans are being served through these executive orders. And we will definitely want to pick that up. And Harry, maybe you and I can think about what's the best way to get at that topic area. Thank you, Noel. Appreciate it. I think with that, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining. And anyone who wants to hang out for a little bit with Harry and me, we'll be working off video and give you all a chance to talk in a smaller group. So thanks everyone for being here.